Patrick Foley here from Longwater Taichi, and welcome to another Stay Connected video. Today I want you to explore something that we call the properties of the stance. So when we're doing our Yang style Tai Chi, I want you to have a little think about how a bow stance in particular is constructed, and maybe isolate this as a separate practice to see if you can work out where your back foot should be, where your front foot should be. In a little while I will show you the positions a little bit more clearly with a shot of the feet, and you'll probably notice that it's quite technical how the stances are put together. The main thing to remember is that the angle of the back foot, whatever you set it at, 45 degrees or under 45 degrees or over 45 degrees, dictates, relative to the direction that you're travelling in, the type of stance that you will be in. So if my back foot is turned out 45 degrees in this direction here, and I want to go into a standard bow stance, the natural place I will step is with my left foot pointing towards camera here, and I will be travelling in this direction. And my feet will be about hip width apart. Okay? A little adjustment of my back foot will change the width and the depth of my stance. I'm now in a wide bow stance. So we'll have a little look at that in a minute. And when you've had some time playing with these stances, working out what's wide, what's normal, what's narrow, and how the back foot is set, I want you to try a little exercise, and that is to just step your foot in any direction, pointing it in any direction. So I'll just step and point my right foot in this direction, and then say, okay, to yourself, say, okay, this is now my back foot, and I want to make a narrow bow stance from the angle of this foot. Where would my front foot be pointing to create a narrow bow stance? So I know that this is going to be more than 45 degrees to the direction of travel, and my stance is going to be narrow and a little bit longer than usual. Okay, so that's how I work out what stance I'm in. I make a step, I go, oh okay, this foot is now going to be my back foot, my left foot, and I'm going to make a standard bow stance. Where am I going to step my right foot, and in what direction will I be pointing in? So this back foot will now be at 45 degrees to the direction of travel. Therefore, I set up my bow stance to about hip width, and I turn my hips in that direction. This has given me my bow stance, standard bow stance. But without moving that back foot, if I now think, well actually, I want to make this a single whip posture, or a narrow bow stance posture, this foot is actually 45 degrees more than the direction of travel. So my foot wants to be a little bit more over here, and my hips are going to turn a little bit more over here, and I'm going to be in a narrower stance to support this. Okay? Right, so what I'd like you to observe, and you may find it a little bit hard to see on the floor here, but there will be an accompanying a picture as well, hopefully, that will come up on camera. But there are 4 points on this floor that make up a square, okay? And if I put my heels on the 2 corners of the square here, I create a wider than a shoulder width stance, okay? And this would typically be, if I sink into my legs a little bit, this would typically would be called a standard horse stance. Now we don't tend to use this stance very much in the form. We have a quality of it in commencement, but where we will be mainly working is from hip width, about this distance, to shoulder width, about this distance. And what I want you to recognize is that between the 2 corners of the square, if you have a look at the diagram that will come up, there is a light curve. Imagine a light curve, and the heel of my foot, my leading foot, which is the left foot in this case, is going to be placed somewhere on that curve as I go through the stances. Okay, and that's in proportion, the amount that the foot goes forward is in proportion to the width of the stance. So if we have a look at this from the perspective of a standard wide bow stance, this is the one where the foot is less, the back foot is less than 45 degrees turned out. So that's 45 degrees. This is less than 45 degrees turned out. And in order to support that stance, I have to be able to step slightly forward and to the bottom part of this curve between the two corners of the square, and then settle and bring my weight forward. And this is exactly the stance that we're looking for when we do part wild horse's mane near the beginning of the form. But watch what happens now. If I turn out my back foot to 45 degrees, it gets a little bit unstable. It's hard to support this stance. It's not very comfortable. So I need to go from shoulder width to hip width and take my foot a little bit more forward to bring myself into the proportion of the stance. And I now have a standard bow stance. Okay, and again, if I take my back foot out further still, past 45 degrees to the direction of travel, then this again becomes not very supportable. So I have to step a little bit further out and narrower to support that stance. And this is now coming into a narrow bow stance like we have in single whip. So we go from a standard bow stance, 45 degrees in the proportion of the square here, which is in many of the movements, in grass bird's tail and in brush knee twist step, for instance, to a narrow bow stance, a wide bow stance, like in part wild horse's mane, to a narrow bow stance, like in single whip. Okay, so that's how the stance proportions work, based on an imaginary square that you're standing in and a light arc from one corner of the square to the other, like this. And your leading foot is going to always be pointing in the direction that you want to be traveling in, and the back foot is measured at an angle to that leading foot. So here 45 degrees, here under 45 degrees, here over 45 degrees. And you can see how the stance fits in to that square as I make these little adjustments to my feet. Very subtle, but incredibly important in structuring the Yang style stance, the properties of the stance. And then here we're back to our standard horse stance, okay, which is from shoulder width to a little bit wider, sometimes a little bit narrower. Okay, so depending on where you put the foot and where you decide what stance you're deciding to take, that dictates what direction you're pointing in. So there's a lot of play that can be done here. Many fun hours of deciding how to step and the direction that you're pointing in. So plenty of practice. And later on, when we start to get into the details of the full 24 step that we were going to start learning before the virus outbreak, these stances become even more important. They become important as well when you're learning how to step from one stance to another stance. So practice them now and you'll be ready for the 24 step or the traditional Yang long form, which we were also going to start teaching this year. All these stance positions become very important then. Thanks very much. Speak to you again soon.